All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on this cold December day. Here to give you the sort of an update on the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, aka the Infrastructure Bill, aka Build Back Better. And I'm joined here with Kyle Lee, also from ATG, as well as Bruce Milligan from White Lake Consulting. Good afternoon, fellas. How you guys doing today?
Hey, doing great, Jason. Thanks. Appreciate it.
I can't complain. For those of you who heard, I'm a Medicare man now, so I can't complain either.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right. You want to switch to the next slide here and we'll talk about our agenda, and I'll let you run it from here, Bruce.
Sure. So we did one of these town halls about 6 or so months ago. I kind of lose track sometimes of the time. So the question is, now we're about a year into this ride with the IIJA. Where do we stand? Talk about what's changed. There's a couple things that are pretty significant that we're going to cover here that have changed. Looking ahead to next year, which is only about 2 weeks away now. What are we looking at for year 2023 in that distant future? Where do I go to see about funds? So we're going to be sharing some links with you today that are really good ones that point out specifically where projects are. And also, are there any technologies that are being considered to get ahead of these opportunities? And a special hint that probably is going to revolve around the cloud, but we won't give away too much of our presentation today. So before we get started, Jason and Kyle, do we have a questionnaire or a poll for the audience to see what the audience looks like today? I don't know if we have that set up or not, but
yeah, I just launched a poll. So great. First question is, what sector do you work in? Do you, are you mainly in private? Are you in public, or do you dabble in both? Is infrastructure a new market segment for your organization? And are you hopeful, or will you be going after any of these projects in 2023? So just throwing that out there. I'm just going to let that churn as we go through here, and we'll continue rolling on.
Okay. We're getting a lot of good feedback here. So we do have some bolts in there. And, so my background is primarily public sector. So I've been working with government since, I'll just say, the early 80s, and have seen a lot of technology waves come and go. The cloud wave does not seem to be dissipating at all. It's really, in my opinion, the culmination of all the other waves that I've seen throughout my career, and there have been some significant ones. So I believe we've got everything pretty well set here. So that gives us a good indication of who's out there. We have some bolts out there. We also have some public and private. So we'll be covering really both areas. And obviously, going after some of these projects from both a public sector standpoint as well as a private sector is obviously what we want to cover here today. So thank you all for joining in on our survey, and we'll start in on the content. So let's just start with where we are now. And I always like to put some links in here. So I'm going to get a little bit interactive here, and hopefully the right link will come up here. So we can all go to this Build Back Better site. This is something that's part of the whitehouse.gov site. It talks a lot about things. Here's the picture that I had. And one of the areas that I think is important is, as you're looking at getting funding for these transportation projects, a lot of the IIJA projects are going to be competitive in nature. So it involves a application process. It involves understanding exactly what you're going to be using this for. The one theme that you'll see woven throughout is the lessons learned from the era, meaning the 2008, 2009 infrastructure bill that came out and had a lot of good information. A lot of good projects got done. But what I was scrolling down to is this category right down here, because here is where they drill down into specific areas. And if you haven't, it's too easy to just go to a site and say, oh, well, it looks like a lot of static content. Go down to the bottom. Trust me on this. There's a lot of good stuff in here, because it talks about some of the areas that you might focus in on, or if you're a government, some of the transportation areas that you might have. It'll tell you what the funding sources are, how much funding is in there. I'm going to show you here in a second the dashboard that's also available on this site that shows state by state what's been given out already. So before I do some of those transitions, either Jason or Kyle, did you have anything to add as far as your view of where things are today based on where we started here a few months ago?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, and one thing I did want to clarify is, I talk to a lot of firms about the infrastructure bill, and they're like, "Oh, well, it's government; it's all private sector," and really, that's not the case. As you can see, there's a shortage of workers. There's a shortage of people across the nation, whether they're working fast food or engineering. It doesn't really make a difference, and a lot of our local governments are reaching out to private firms to help them with these projects. So even if you're a mom and pop shop, a couple engineers and a drafter, you can still access these projects. You just got to make the right connections, and going through some of these links that Bruce is sharing, especially if you're a little slow during the holiday season, it's a great way to get ahead of things. So don't think that this is just government stuff only.
Right. And what Bruce is showing right now is tremendously valuable. For a lot of people, that's the major roadblock for them, is not knowing where to go to understand the opportunities that may be out there in their area. So I think that, if nothing else, that's going to be a very, very valuable piece of information that is relayed on the webinar today, is, really, where can you go to access information about projects that are taking place in your area?
Yeah, thanks, guys. And the other part of this that I thought was really important, this is part of the GSA site, which has kind of the keys to all the kingdom here. They give this little map here, and I'll put the link to this one in chat just so everybody has access to this, because a lot of times when you see kind of what's out there, so let me just drop that in chat and make sure I'm putting it in the right chat here. Actually, that just went to Jason and Kyle. Could you send that out to the entire group? Because if I try to do something different, I'm going to mess it up.
I'm on it. There you go, everybody.
Guaranteed. So as you can see, when you hover over this, it talks about what's been granted to date, state by state. So if you're in a particular state, let's say Minnesota, and you wanted to get an idea of what's actually been awarded, it gives you some good ideas there on where to look and everything. So check out this interactive map. I found this dashboard really, which is a real good one. You can also get it in different formats. You can get the Excel file downloaded. So there's a lot of good information in there that you can use to kind of make some decisions as far as from both the private sector and the public sector fashion. So check out that link. So I downloaded the Excel, and I decided, let me just see what the spend is by category. So here's where the 840 billion has been specifically laid out, which sort of tells a story, sort of doesn't. In order to get a better story, I decided to drill down into specific agencies. So for example, the FAA is up here. They've got 25 million, or billion rather, I should say, that they've identified. And one of the things I've looked at for FAA, so let me just bring up this map. There's yet another, and I'll put this also into chat, and I'll ask my cohorts to distribute this also to the group, because I'm probably not going to do it right.
Yep.
I have many talents. One of them is probably not navigating through Zoom. You would think I have this down after almost 3 years of this, but this is just an example. Okay, thanks. So here's the the FAA portion of this. So here's what they've given. It's actually higher than the 15 billion. What I like about, so here's a map of all the FAA grants. Okay, so it's quite an eye chart, as you can see, and obviously you can hover in and drill down by state. But what I found to be really intriguing here is they give this airport allocation file, and this is also a little bit small to read, but you'll kind of get the idea here when I pull this up. So this is the December grants that have been given out by the FAA for specific airports. So over here, obviously they tell you where, which airport, the grant number, they give you all the things you need, and especially this project talking points. So this is just the December 1st example. And this is, as you can see up here, this is just round one. I'm not sure when round two starts, but you can guess that they're going to be putting a lot of information out there as far as grants. So if you're in the private sector and you work and you do airport projects, this is a great place to go. And specifically, like this Denver International project involves drainage improvements, which, if that's one of the things that you do a lot of, obviously that gives you some good direction as far as what types of projects you would want to go after. If you're a public sector agency, it should also give you some ideas on how this is worded. So as you're going through the grant application process, here are some great examples of other governments that have successfully got grants out of the Infrastructure Act. It gives you kind of a roadmap, if you will, of how this can work. So I'll maybe stop here and ask anything, Jason, either you or Kyle want to add on to that?
Well, like you said, that's just round one, and it showed like what, $14 million, and they said that there was 2.89 billion made available each year, right? So just that round one, there's going to be a lot more. Just millions of dollars getting thrown out there. So if you're, like you said, Bruce, if you're looking at airport projects, or you have had a history of working with airports, go through that list, make a phone call, because now you have a qualified call if they need help. So lots of good opportunities out there.
Absolutely. And the fact that they're breaking it down and issuing that report on a monthly basis, I mean, it makes it a whole lot more digestible, makes it easier to understand, you know, which of these different funding projects are rolling out, you know, sooner, or I should say, you know, more relevant to the time frame that I'm at right now, rather than having to look at a master list from the whole year and then try to sort and figure out which ones of these maybe they're already in progress at this point, you know. So being able to look at that filtered down by month and being able to take that information for the month of December gives you some excellent opportunities to be able to act on and know that they are pertinent to whenever you're reaching out to those different airports around that.
Right. And also, you know, I went to that dashboard and I clicked on my local airport, and it's for the fiscal year 23, they've got $3.7 million allocated already. And I've started, you know, I fly out of that airport quite a lot. They're starting to have, you know, public input meetings. So me as a traveler, I can have some input on how I would like those funds to be spent as well. Should it be more on, you know, security or rail runway infrastructure? So if you're like being involved in the community, this is also another opportunity for you to sort of have your say. These are taxpayer dollars after all.
That's true. That is true.
There's a rather lengthy manual that goes along with it that I've chosen not to show here. It's 450 something pages that talks about the grant process. So there's significant documentation that the government has put out here. Obviously, the internet is one of the big changes between now and when Aero was done back in 2008, 2009. The internet obviously existed back then, but it's not being used to the extent that it is now. And obviously, that's a real game changer. And also from a government standpoint, they're talking a lot about broadband and making sure that internet access is available to all. So there's just projects all over the place. And this map can look a little intimidating. I will not lie. You can hover over and get the dots, similar to what Jason did with his airport. But just suffice it to say, there are projects all over. And this is just one example of grants that are going on in a pretty recognizable industry that has embraced technology in a big way. All right, so that's kind of the first part, and wanted to just kind of cover where we are now. And we'll, you know, certainly be here to answer any questions you might have. I thought I'd transition a little bit. We did a 6-month or so check-in, and what has changed. So obviously one of the big things is inflation. And inflation, you know, this article I think is pretty telling, where it talks about cutting into this windfall. And I'll show you some examples here in a minute. And anyone who's been doing government projects knows that this is not new. I mean, inflation has been going on. We're now starting to layer on top of that shortage of materials, concrete, things like that, that just aren't as available. And as Jason mentioned, there's just a shortage of skilled people. And again, if we're relating this back to somebody in the private sector, there's obviously a need to try to get some more of these kind of resources in there. Governments are, I'm finding, losing a lot of people right now. I had a call with an airport this morning, and they're talking about, you know, people leaving and the issues that that's created. And we'll be talking about the accountability and so forth, but inflation is obviously a big thing. I took just one snippet out of the article. I think we can all guess what this article would have in it, but they're talking about cost overruns and contingencies, which typically are put aside for, we always used to call them things that go bump in the night on projects. We all know what that is. And those contingency funds, which we always viewed as being kind of discretionary, like they may need it, they may not. If they don't, they roll it in. No longer. I mean, now everything's being used up in a capital project. And so getting a really good handle on things up front is more important now than it ever has been, because governments know that inflation is going to take a real chunk out of whatever funding they're getting. So I might stop and take a breath and ask for Kyle or Jason if you guys wanted to jump in and add some color commentary to that.
Well, this is, it all goes back to some of the COVID things. It's sort of a perfect storm of circumstances that are leading to this. But, I've worked with a client who had a big water line project in mind. And then with the increase of cost of, plastics, obviously pipes went up a whole lot. So instead of being able to do 3/4 of a mile of, water line, they're down to, quarter mile. So significant cost increases, which does have the impact on what's going to actually get built from this bill. However, that money that's allocated still has to be spent, right? So some improvements will happen, but it might require us looking at different technologies, different leaner strategies, different ways to add more efficiency to these projects as we go, and certainly look at right sizing based upon the funding available.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well, Jason.
So obviously inflation is a big thing. Also, the government, and Jason just kind of alluded to this, getting everything done in a timely fashion. And something called Everyday Counts has been something that a lot of transportation agencies at the state level have been dealing with for a long time. This is through the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA. They had an initiative called Everyday Counts. And that has once again taken front and center. And we'll be talking a little bit more about what this means to both people delivering projects as private consultants, as well as governments managing them. But that is a big part of this Infrastructure Act, is getting these projects done in a timely fashion. And Everyday Counts sounds a little bit like a marketing thing, but it has been in place at the federal government now for some time. Just to give you some idea, this is from the FHWA Everyday Counts website. And as you can see, this is the seventh, that as in 7 iteration of this. And each one of them builds on the prior one. So this is not new. I mean, this has been going on for 10 plus years. And there's a long list of innovations that are included in this. Now, is the federal government requiring you to use these initiatives? No, they don't. I'll be talking about e-construction here, but they do. I think what they're trying to do is share best practices. Like, here's what some of these other states are doing to help get these projects implemented safely. And kind of the point of what Kyle and Jason were talking about earlier, in the age of COVID, doing it in a safe fashion. So one of them that I want to touch on here is going to be e-construction. And e-construction has to do with the paperless construction process. Now, those of us who have been in the industry for a while know that there's always an issue with signature, because engineering plans have to be signed by an engineer, somebody with a comma PE after their name, with an active engineering license. And after a lot of iterations, governments have kind of figured out how to do that electronically. And that's opened up a lot of the floodgates for states. So for example, Virginia DOT was one of the pioneers in implementing a paperless construction process. So they'll all call it e-construction, which involves document management, UAVs, 3D modeling, everything here that you see on the screen. And at first, it was just about making things easier to do. But so this is, specifically for the government users out there who are at our webinar here today, it's really morphed into beyond just making it more efficient. They piloted technology called PlanGrid, which is a remote inspection solution. And what they found is that this is saving them 4 to 5 hours per week, just in not having to go back and forth to the office and try to come up with the right version of it. They came up with an ROI of this of over 500% at Virginia Department of Transportation. And governments pick up on that. Remember, we just talked about this inflation issue eating up contingencies. Well, if they can find a way to make things more efficient, that's going to help governments all over. So I might, again, stop here and take a quick breath and ask for Kyle and Jason to jump in with other comments you might have on that.
Sure, I'll chime in here. One of the things, so my role here at ATG, I know we didn't go through any formal introductions earlier, but I'm our senior construction solution specialist. So that means that I live and breathe day in, day out the Autodesk cloud hosted solutions that are going to aid in project management. And, that's one of the big shifts that we've been seeing quite a bit over the course of this year is the moving away from the adoption of some of these collaborative technology tools from just the design aspects, the design disciplines on a project, to actually seeing them being more embraced by the entirety of the project team. And where I've really seen a shift is in the government aspect of, different municipal based DOTs or water departments or things like that. But these different government entities actually purchasing and owning their own cloud hosted collaborative solution to basically run and manage their projects out of. And I think that a lot of that is basically, a part of this whole, making every day count and seeing and sharing the information across the states about the value that other areas, other regions may be realizing through the adoption of technology. So, that's one thing that I've seen really, really ramp up for us in the past 12 months is the interest and the actual moving forward on the, at the municipal and at the government level of these different, cities or states or departments within them that say we want to own this collaborative platform because we want to own this data and own this information. And they're seeing also, as we mentioned before, that ROI and that streamlining of the processes that are taking place on site that is starting to basically provide, very quick ROI on their investment, but also, like we said before, freeing up some, not basically having to utilize as much of that funding just on personnel, because they're able to get their jobs done more quickly and more efficiently. And that information is available more broadly across the project teams.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the typical model, kind of to Kyle's point, is where, like in the case of VDOT, they would have the contractors come in, they would bring their own system for project A. Then for project B, somebody brings in a different system and so on. And at the end of it, VDOT gets the data that's required in the contract based on as-built or whatever they are, photos. But good luck, trying to sort it all out when you have to, go after a contractor. And so governments, to Kyle's point, have really gotten more on board about this, bringing the construction management in-house. It's just something we're seeing a lot of now. Another example of that is New Mexico DOT. So they did basically the same thing where they started out with pilots, and based on the on how well it went, they've really ramped up their use of this. And there's 5 or 6 states that I know of that are now requiring contractors to come in and use the cloud issued by the state DOT. And it's not just state DOTs. I'm working with airports. They're doing the same thing now. They're kind of tired of being invited to the party. They want to host the party so they can set up, whatever rules they want. Because at the end of the day, they have to manage these assets for decades to come, and they need to know what's going on a lot more than they ever have in the past. So,
absolutely.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, I'm going to transition a little bit. So those are kind of the things that are new. So obviously, the inflation's been a big issue. Hopefully, for all our sakes, that's going to settle down here. But also just the need for project delivery to be done quickly and more efficiently, and for the governments to save money. Because really the government, their view of this is they're going to be held accountable. I mean, they're getting grants from the federal government. So they need to be accountable, own the data. And also, as long as they're at it, they want to be sustainable and also, be responsible about the assets that are being created. you see green initiatives going on all over, and things like drainage plans, which in the past somebody else was kind of responsible for. The governments are becoming more and more, I guess I'll call it proactive, and getting a better handle on what's going on there. So Jason or Kyle, do you have anything else to add before we kind of move on here a little bit?
Well, just part of that sustainability, moving away from paper. Paper's expensive, ink's gone up, printers have gone up. They're also affected by that inflation, and printing out a set of plans, let alone 50 sets to have on a job site, is a huge chunk of change, and plans change, right? There's always an RFI or an addendum or something, and being sure that everybody has the same access to the single source of truth is going to not only prevent errors from happening, it's going to save a ton of cost. So this whole movement, regardless of what platform you're looking at, as far as hosting all this digital design data, is certainly making much more impact, not just in the workflow, but also the overall project health and, mitigating errors.
Yeah. And, again, the big key there for government is, in my opinion, is that second point, owning the data. And that goes back to what Bruce said a few moments ago. Typically in the past, we might see that, the design aspect of a project gets started by the design team, and it's hosted within a design team's cloud environment. Then when they get ready to move it to construction, the design team hands over what they want to that's necessary for construction, but that doesn't mean they're handing over all of the data. And so then the GC or the construction management firm, they're responsible. They have their own platform that they're recreating the project in to bring that data into, to utilize that during the pre-construction and execution phase of the project. And then at the end of that, again, just like what Bruce said, they're handing over what information is a requirement based on the project deliverables and the contract that was put in place. But in some cases, they may not find out till months or even years later that we really needed this additional information, this additional data. And we know that it was a part of the project. We just didn't ask for it. So now that they are the ones, now that these government entities are the ones that are actually owning the collaborative solution, now that means that they can go back and they can access that data at any given point, and also accessing the entirety of the data. And another big value in that as well is not just being able to access that data after completion, but also being able to collaboratively participate during the project process, especially during design, and being able to, get, basically buy-in and approval earlier on different aspects, because they're all operating within the same environment and working off of and looking at the same data, rather than having to, pull that out of our environment. Now we're going to go present on this. Oh, we've got to mark up what we saw in the presentation. Now that's all just happening collaboratively across the entirety of the team there. So again, owning that data is massively valuable for these different government entities.
Yeah. It's kind of like, if we think of just somebody taking a photo at a construction site, it's like any other photo. You can read it any number of ways. So a photo, of,
Yep.
We're kind of joking about backhoes at the beginning of this. A contractor could say, well, this shows that it's your fault. And the government can say, well, this shows that it's your fault. If there's no context around that photo, which is exactly what Kyle was just touching on, it really doesn't tell the complete story. So I think we've, talked this through, and it's absolutely a trend that governments are really, they're rewording their contracts. So when they put out RFPs for construction, just be prepared to see some different things in here. One of them being, thou shalt use our system. That's probably the nicest way to put it. And, government, just to, put one more thing on here about rework, the rework that typically governments do is, and we talked a little bit about this, where they've got this contingency. So you take a $10 million project, 8 million of that's going to actually be the brick and mortar and the contractors and all that kind of stuff. They set aside 800, and that 800 typically gets swallowed up pretty fast. And BIM, which is really what we're kind of talking about here, it doesn't necessarily have to be building information modeling. See, I still have my Autodesk thing. They had a mandate where I had to say BIM. once every meeting. So now you guys have all witnessed that I've said it, even though I don't work for Autodesk anymore, because it can save a lot of that money. And here's an example of a government that's doing what Kyle was just describing. So this is an airport. This is Denver International Airport, and they've got architects over here doing projects for them. And as part of that, they're doing it in the Autodesk Revit modeling technology. Denver sets up their own QA QC hub, if you will, and it's a Denver-owned hub, so they own it. And once everything gets locked down, they put it on a SharePoint site. Then they send people out in the field to capture all that construction data using a build product. From there, it goes to their CMMS system, which in this case is Maximo. Then it gets fed back in. All the geometry and all the other data that they're capturing is fed back into the hub, so that when the next project comes along, they're ready to go. And because of this, and Denver, by the way, also has very strict BIM standards. So without getting into all the the nuts and bolts here, but you need both pieces. You need to really have maybe not BIM standards put together, because not everybody at the government is ready for a full BIM implementation, but at a minimum, have your CAD standards set up and have it set up so you're getting the data the way you want, whether it's 2D or 3D. And Denver was able to really get a lot of benefits out of this, a huge reduction in change orders and RFIs, coordination, ahead of schedule. I mean, it's a really great story as far as one example of a government who really decided we're going to do things differently. This whole design bid build model is something they have to live with, but we're at least going to get the data in the format that makes sense to us at the end of this. So I'll maybe stop again and ask Kyle or Jason if you guys had anything else you wanted to add to that.
I mean, as someone who spent a lot of time inside the Denver airport, I mean, it's huge, right? It's massive. And to think what a monumental construction task that was, and to actually have data that backs up the time savings, the cost savings for such a monumental project is outstanding, right? But yet we're still seeing small towns and small agencies struggle with a one block improvement of Main Street USA, right? Because they're still holding on to some of those older techniques where everybody's going to need to get accelerated. If the government starts doing things faster than private, then everything's going backwards, right? Traditionally we expect government to be lagging behind private industry, but now we're starting to see those tides kind of turn a little bit, which is it's a fascinating time.
Sure is.
Well, and anytime that we can see a project as massive as the Denver International Airport deliver 3 months ahead of schedule, that's huge. And not only is that just a huge achievement in and of itself, think about the GC on that project and also the subs, if they were rewarded incentive based on early delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen contracts where you get awarded X amount of dollars per day for early delivery, and then you receive a penalty of X amount of dollars per day for late delivery. To see that you get 90 days worth of that incentive-based pay coming back into the GC and their different partners on that project, man, that right there just shows, I guarantee you that whomever it was, now Denver International Airport, they owned the hub, they owned the data. But I will guarantee you, if that GC was not using that particular solution before they came into that project, I've got a feeling that they used some of that contingency earnings there to invest in that solution for their next projects and all future projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are really seeing the wisdom of doing things a little differently. So.
Yeah. And
the last area on this that I just want to touch on briefly is just, kind of the way the industry is going, and it's all about connecting. So, we're going to talk a little bit about, the trends and some of the things that we're seeing. And as I mentioned at the onset, it involves the cloud. That's a pro tip on this, a little bit of a sneak preview. I mean, the cloud has changed everything, and the way that these collaborations are done. Used to be you'd have a trailer out there, they'd load up Navisworks, you'd bring in all the different models, everyone huddles around and sees where all the problems might come in. the cloud has allowed people to do that virtually from anywhere at any time. So the findings I'm going to show here is in a it's called a Smart Market Brief that was put out by McGraw-Hill Construction. And they talk about this trend and the owner's use of these solutions. So again, we've seen for a while contractors using the cloud. Now the governments are starting to do it. So it's not just us, the three of us in here talking about this. This is a real trend that we're seeing all over the place, that just people are starting to really embrace this. And when you look at kind of an overview of the solutions and the benefits that they got on it, a lot of them are financial. And obviously that's a big thing, but it's getting these Infrastructure Job Act projects done quickly. And that's really the topic of our webinar today is what some of the best practices are and what we see people doing. And a lot of them are getting these hubs set up and really starting to get to work on those. And the benefits to the owner, we've talked a lot about those, just a better understanding of the design and getting the projects done quickly. So I won't belabor that point because we have talked about that quite a bit. And, you know, along with the different functionality components that are in there. The last piece I want to touch on briefly has to do with sustainability and getting everything, I guess I'll call it, put in a green fashion. So if you are working with buildings, if you're either an architect or as a government, you might oversee buildings. If you're higher ed, for example, you've obviously got schools and things like that. And just about every government has a green building initiative or a green infrastructure initiative going on. You can Google it. It's pretty much a common thing. And you know, the ones that are really getting ahead of it, and this is an industry consortium, the Building Transparency, and they talk about this, what's called the EC3 calculator, which is a free calculator, and it allows you to, you know, get an idea of a snapshot of where the building is today, and then gives you specific recommendations on how to reduce the carbon footprint. And again, this is all free, so it's not something that you have to pay for or anything. It's something that we see a lot of, because governments are really trying to be more stewards of the assets that they're building. So I don't know, either Jason or Kyle, have you guys run into this calculator? Have you seen it being used either by owners or by architects in your lines of business?
I have currently not myself, but now, Jason, you may have seen something different. Now, again, here's the thing. There's a very good chance a lot of the different firms that we're working with are in fact using this or using a very similar tool in the background. I've just not been exposed to it. I have to feel like one of my larger architectural clients that I used to work with significantly over in Memphis. I have a feeling that they're using something very, very close to this, if not this exact tool, because they are constantly getting awarded for, you know, sustainability of their projects, for, you know, LEED certified buildings that they're designing. So I know that they're using a tool similar to this to basically achieve that.
Right. Okay. And even if they're not now, that doesn't mean that they won't be in the future. Right.
That's
so
true.
We were just talking about BIM and these different workflows and the adoption of BIM. And, you know, for some, it's still a concept that people don't understand. Right. BIM is still a lofty goal for a lot of firms. But working with, you know, carbon credits and fighting climate change and having better, more efficient, more green buildings, that concept is coming for everybody, right? It's something that we need to take care of. You know, I don't deal with architects very often anymore in my current role, but I'm a LEED accredited professional myself. I've got a great interest in all this stuff, but it doesn't necessarily align with my current position here, but doesn't mean that it's not something that I don't have a lot of care for, right? And I think that's something that I'm happy to see us sort of intermingling, not just the BIM part of it, but also the environmental part of it. And I think together, how this is going to transform our future construction sites and processes is going to be, you know, literally life-changing.
Right. Well, there's cities like New York City that have put on a law that you have to have a carbon reduction footprint. I think it's down to, I'm not sure what it is, but it's they want to eliminate it by, I think, 2050, but they have interim goals between now and then. President Biden, I think, signed an executive order a year or so ago that also mandated this for federal buildings, and many governments are doing it at a local level. I was talking with there's a chief resiliency officer for the city and county of San Francisco who is involved with this firsthand, where she's actually doing all the testing and they're modeling all the buildings. I mean, really, the only thing you require here is a 3D model of the building. You can't really do it with a CAD file, but you can do it if you have a full, robust 3D model of the facility. So again, most for the people in the private sector, you'll see more about this, and for people in the public sector, it's just something to bear in mind. You know, no longer is this something that you've got to be San Francisco or New York City to do. It's pretty much being rolled out to everybody. It's just part of it. And that's a big part of these grants. So if you're a government and applying for these grants, tie in the resiliency aspect, which may involve this, this kind of thing with green buildings. It may just involve having an LID compatible stormwater plan. I mean, it comes down to understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish and tying in resiliency to it.
So, absolutely. And I want to highlight that point that you made, Bruce, because it was on the tip of my tongue as well. It's like, you don't have to think about New York City or San Francisco. This is going to happen to, Oklahoma and Main Street USA, everywhere. These trends, when, they prove to be effective, are going to transform our nation. And it doesn't matter what corner of the state you are in, what political leanings there are, this is going to be part of our new world. And it's something to get ahead of.
That is, couldn't have put it better. Why not get ahead of it and be proactive rather than having to be extremely reactive, and knowing that, well, we all have seen scenarios where when you go into a reactive state, that just impacts your business as a whole. When you can get out in front of things, when you can be prepared for that, in most cases, you actually have the opportunity to capitalize on those types of scenarios, because your team is already equipped and ready to move forward in these manners, whereas everyone else possibly in that local market is being very reactionary, and now they're being forced to bring this in by a drop dead date. And not only are they having to bring it in, they're having to get their teams up to speed on what to do with it, rather than having already adopted it 6 months, 8 months, a year or two prior, and this is just the way we've been doing things. We don't have to change anything. So that's huge.
And really the icing on this proverbial cake is that the government is going to be funding a lot of this through the Infrastructure Act. So if there's ever a chance for governments at the local level to really get on board with a lot of this is certainly the time to do it.
Well, and that's also worth mentioning. Some of these larger projects that are rolling out through this Infrastructure Act, sometimes companies can't afford to bring in a new technology or a new platform or a new tool whenever they're doing a typical project that may only be $15,000 to $50,000. But when you're dealing with a project where you're going to be looking at millions of dollars, possibly more, or even for some of these hundreds of thousands of dollars, that will give you the opportunity to bring in and start to leverage some of these newer technologies and these newer techniques where you may not have had the ability to do so before, or the funding.
Yeah, so it's a good advantage, and that kind of leads into my slide as we kind of bring up here kind of some key takeaways. So let's start with, if you're an owner, if you're with the government, which it sounds like we have some folks out there with the government, leverage your role as the owner. I know we've talked about this a lot, but governments, I think, are really waking up and saying, hey, we own this. We're not going to be held to whatever the whims of the contractors are, and leverage your role as the owner, whether you're San Francisco, New York, or some smaller community, and wherever you happen to be. Significant need for transparency. So what governments, as we've talked about a lot here today, is, we want to own the data, and we want to control things a lot more than we ever have in the past. And the third bullet there is use this Infrastructure Act, and that's what we just covered on that prior slide, as a way of building a more sustainable future for yourselves as well as the community where you are. So before I get to the commercial firms, either Jason or Kyle, was there any color you wanted to add to the owner, to takeaways for the owners here?
Well, just kind of going back to that original start where you were showing those grant opportunities and the projects that were already out there, right? So if you are thinking about going after these funds, if you're already equipped, if you already know the lingo, if you know the cloud processes, if you know the more current trends in how project delivery is done, the better suited you're going to be to win some of those projects. So, you know, use this time to align yourself with the future of project delivery, and the more you're going to stand out.
And you know, I think that you pretty well nailed it down here, Bruce, with those points for the owner. You know, that pretty much wraps it all up, puts a bow on top of it. Those 3 points right there, those are very, very important.
Okay. You know, obviously with commercial firms, you know, it's always important to understand the needs of your customers, and you have to ask them that. You know, I'll call them clients, understanding that they're under a lot of cost and inflationary pressures right now, as well as the need to deliver and leverage your expertise to help, and try to do whatever you can to help with collaboration. And as I mentioned earlier, just be prepared to hear some different requirements. I mean, there used to be a design bid build type RFP that comes out. It's going to look the same, just put a different project name and some different responsibilities, but just be prepared to hear some different requirements. And frankly, a lot of times governments will look favorably on firms that propose something like this, like, hey, yes, we can absolutely run this whole thing for us or for you, but wouldn't you like to at least have control over it and offer suggestions to the government? They would certainly appreciate hearing about that. They're, you know, really into doing things differently and in a more innovative fashion. So this is a great time to be innovative.
Absolutely.
All right, just it's kind of a wrap. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, and I think you're absolutely right, and it ties back into what you said about, you know, about leveraging your strengths there and leveraging your innovation in-house and being able to show these different you know, government entities, hey, we already have these capabilities. We know what we're doing when we start to play in projects like these. That's going to give you a huge leg up over the others that do not have that experience yet. So didn't mean to interrupt there, Bruce.
That's fine. The last thing I'm going to put in here, and I'll put this into chat as well. There's DLT, which is the government aggregator for Autodesk, has this infrastructure white paper where they talk about a lot of the topics that we just talked about. So Kyle and Jason, if you don't mind sharing that as well, I'll get better at, I promise I'll get better at Zoom here. I promise.
Oh.
But
Jason,
but you know, these are
yeah, 404 though. Hang on. I clicked the link that I pasted and I got a 404. So let me see if I can fix that. There we go.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I might not have done that quite
Try
right.
that one, everybody.
Yeah, so check out the white paper. It's a really good example of, you know, how governments are approaching these as well as commercial firms. And feel free to reach out to any of us. I put our email addresses on there, and those are probably going to be provided in the follow-up emails that you're getting from this. So before we wrap this up, I'll just maybe open it up for any other questions that might come up. Was there anything in chat or any Q&A that might be out there that we can answer, or does anyone have any questions for us?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything in the chat or in the Q&A section right now, but if anybody does have questions, feel free to throw something in there in the chat, or if we need to unmute any of the participants, we'll be happy to do that as well. Guys, it looks like we did such a great job that
I know
we left them speechless. They don't even know what questions to ask at this point. That's awesome.
I can offer any hints on Medicare, but you know, I'll leave that for your financial professionals. So
thank you so much
for
Brent.
the positive comments on that. Thank you.
Yeah,
appreciate that. So if you have any anything else, anything before we sign off here, either Kyle or Jason?
I just want to pass on the comment that was left here. Do you have a napkin? You fed me a lot. So with that note, thanks for tuning in today. As always, take a look at our YouTube channel at atgusa.com, or ATG USA is our channel. We've got tons of content to talk about different things. And if you're interested in more things like this or any other topic, let us know. We're happy to talk about what you want to talk about. Bruce, as always, it's a pleasure to have
yes.
you with us today. And Kyle, my brother from another mother, always pleasure to work with you.
Always. Absolutely. But no, thank you, Bruce. Absolutely.
For everybody else that
thank you,
joined
guys.
in, have a safe and happy holiday. Stay warm out there, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Thanks.
Have a great
Take care.
day.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and check out some of the other content on our channel.